They called it an accident. A single word, neat, official, and empty enough to bury questions. But when it comes to you Menglong, nothing has ever been that simple. The more you look, the more you realize that what happened that night wasn't just a tragedy. It was the quiet erasure of a man who had begun to ask the wrong questions. And now, silence is being enforced not by grief, but by fear. For years, Yu Menglong had been the perfect face of charm and discipline in the entertainment world. A man whose calm demeanor hid the long hours, the late-night rehearsals, the exhaustion that crept into his interviews. He smiled, even when his eyes said something else. People adored him for that. His humility, his warmth, his steadiness. But behind the studio lights and red carpet glamour, a darker rhythm had begun to pulse beneath the surface of his career. Months before his so-called accident, insiders reported that Yu had been distant. He had started turning down projects, rare for someone known for his reliability. And during a private event captured in shaky fan footage, he was seen confronting a senior executive from his agency. The sound was muted, but the look on his face wasn't. Something had snapped. Those close to him remember a phrase he used often in those final weeks. There are things I can't keep pretending not to see. At the time, it sounded poetic. Another artist's cryptic lament about the pressures of fame. But now, it sounds like a warning that no one understood in time. When the accident happened, the official story was clean and rehearsed. A late-night drive. A sudden turn. A malfunction. The car went off the road. No witnesses. No external involvement. It was the kind of story that begs to be accepted quickly. Simple, tragic, and irreversible. But almost immediately, the cracks began to show. Reporters who tried to visit the site described heavy police presence and missing CCTV recordings from the surrounding area. A local worker, who spoke anonymously, claimed that the security cameras had been under maintenance for 2 days before the incident. 2 days. Even stranger, Yu Menglong's phone, supposedly damaged beyond recovery, was listed in an internal report as in evidence storage only hours after the crash, despite the vehicle not yet being cleared from the scene. How did they recover it so quickly? And why has no one outside the investigation ever seen that device? When journalists began to push for answers, their stories vanished almost as fast as they appeared. Entertainment pages pulled articles. Blog posts were scrubbed. Entire threads of discussion disappeared within minutes of posting. It felt orchestrated, like an invisible hand was erasing not only questions but the right to ask them. Weeks later, something else emerged. A technician from a local broadcasting station, who has since gone missing, claimed to have handled raw security footage from a highway checkpoint near the scene. According to him, the footage didn't show a lone car. It showed two, one following closely behind Yu Menglong's vehicle until the final moment. He said the second car's license plate was partially visible, registered not to a private individual, but to a subsidiary connected to Yu's own management agency. When asked why he didn't release the clip publicly, his response was chilling. Because they told me it never existed. By the second week, fans began noticing the sudden shutdown of Yu's official fan accounts. Group moderators, who had been managing them for years, posted final messages claiming they had received orders to discontinue activity. That's when whispers began circulating online. Yu Menglong wasn't simply a victim of fate. He was a casualty of what he knew. To understand why, we need to look at the months leading up to his death. Around that time, several smaller artists under the same company began quietly leaving their contracts. A few spoke of unfair treatment, but never elaborated. One young trainee allegedly confided to a friend that Yu Menglong had been trying to protect them, trying to expose financial manipulation within the agency's structure. There were rumors of missing funds, of forced image deals, and of performance contracts signed under duress. Most brushed it off as internet drama. But when forensic accountants later discovered discrepancies in the agency's reported revenue, hundreds of millions unaccounted for, the puzzle pieces began to align in a way too uncomfortable to ignore. In one of his last recorded interviews, Yu was asked what he wanted his legacy to be. He paused, smiled faintly, and said, "To leave the world a little more honest than I found it." At the time, the audience applauded. No one knew how heavy that sentence truly was. After the accident, a memorial service was arranged at record speed. Closed casket. Private guest list. Even the fans who gathered outside the hall were kept several meters away by security barriers. When asked why, organizers said it was to maintain order. But several attendees later confessed that something about that day felt staged. Like the farewell wasn't for the man, but for the story they needed people to believe. Behind the scenes, investigators faced resistance. A junior officer later told a journalist friend that their requests for accident scene files were flagged for internal review by higher departments. No one knew why. Soon after, he retracted his statement and refused further comment. One line from his original post, however, stayed online just long enough to be archived. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't finding evidence, it's being allowed to see it. The mystery deepened when digital forensics experts analyzing Yu Menglong's online activity found something unusual. In the days before the crash, his personal cloud drive had been wiped clean. All documents, notes, messages, gone. But metadata showed the deletion wasn't performed from his usual IP address. It came from an internal network belonging to his management company. If he didn't delete them, who did? Around this time, another strange event occurred. A museum exhibit dedicated to Yu Menglong's achievements briefly went viral after visitors noticed something peculiar behind the main statue. A carved inscription, barely visible, that translated loosely to "truth buried in silence." Soon after online photos spread, the museum announced a temporary closure for maintenance. A week later, a fire broke out in one of its storage rooms. No casualties, minimal damage, but the section containing Yu Menglong's personal items? Completely destroyed. Officials called it coincidence. The public called it fate. But to many who followed his story, it felt like erasure. Months later, a journalist claimed to have received anonymous footage from an undisclosed source. The sender called it the truth they tried to delete. In the short, grainy video, a figure resembling Yu Menglong is seen entering a dimly lit building. Not the route of his final drive, but a studio owned by his company. The timestamp is from the same night. Moments later, two unidentified men follow him inside. The camera cuts out. Authorities have refused to confirm or deny the video's authenticity, calling it potentially harmful to public stability. Why harmful? Why too dangerous to release? Because if real, it changes everything. It suggests Yu Menglong never drove that night voluntarily. It suggests he was taken. And it suggests that what